Thank you, Margaret, for coming and speaking with me for Psychic Kids United.
Thanks, Tara.
Yeah,
Nice to be here.
I'm so happy that I get to split you and Liz up and like do a thorough 2 hours plus, because you're two different people and it's just two different stories, two different ability. Well, it's more than two, but we have a big span of things here that we can hit. And what I would love to talk about, which is actually literally the first thing I wrote in my podcasting journal when I started, of things that I wanted to talk about. And it was about losing a child, because it hits so deeply. I have not lost a child, but I do know, as a person who hasn't lost a child, all the questions that I want to ask, I can't, and I don't know how to approach those people in trying to help those of us who have not lost a child navigate those conversations. And so when I finally found you, and we're talking of like a more universal ideology, a spiritual ideology of losing a child, I was so thrilled, because it was something I put out there so long ago to really just dive into candidly.
Right.
So before we get into that, though, I would love to start at the beginning. And if you wouldn't mind, give me a little sense of like your background and what it was like for you to grow up, and if you're aware of your intuition.
So I grew up in Ottawa as the eldest of 5 kids. And when I look back, there's all sorts of little things that I can go, oh yeah, oh yeah. At the time, no, had no real knowledge that that my invisible friends were not imaginary friends, and also, it was just sort of not a thing in my family or background at the time that I knew of. And things happened when I was 16. About 16, my mom's parents both died when she was about 16, and her mom died in the house we lived in. And one night, everyone had gone to bed, and I heard footsteps downstairs, at the bottom of the stairs. And my room was at the top of the stairs. The stairs come up like this, so that there was the overhang and then the top 3 stairs. And my parents' bedroom was downstairs. And I heard footsteps downstairs. And I was like, Mom, is that you? And there was no answer. And footsteps came towards the bottom of the stairs. I'm like, Mom? Footsteps start coming up the stairs. I'm like, Mom! Footsteps stopped. And I heard my mom get out of bed and come running. And she looked, there was nobody, but I knew I'd heard something. And of course, I put it together later. Of course, it was my grandmother. And she wasn't trying to scare me. She was just walking up the stairs to check in on us. I'm sure she probably did it lots. But that was but nobody really talked about it. That was kind of a weird thing. So there would be little weird things that would happen. I was also fascinated by all things spiritual and I guess paranormal in a sense. I had gone to like Sunday school as a kid, and then I was fascinated by religion and of all sorts. And so I read the Bible, and then I read stories about people who grew up in different faiths around the world. I read books from my public school library about witches and astrology and all of these really cool topics that, I sometimes wonder, whoa, where did those books come from? But studied astrology, moved into tarot for fun. That was a thing in university, but just for fun. But as then I grew up and I got very involved with goddess spirituality in the 80s and women's spirituality. And that brings us up to a certain point. So I was doing all of this different study and research, and then when I guess sometimes what happens for a lot of us is that there's sort of like a catalyst or something that wakes us up or pushes us into a different dimension. And for me, looking back, I really feel like it was when I did lose my daughter. And my daughter Jenny died before she was born. And so it was a whole thing of both the things that everybody hears about, you know, the syndrome where a woman will feel like her arms are aching because they're empty. So I experienced that, but I also experienced things like I couldn't lie on my side because I would hear a baby crying if I lay on either side, so I'd have to lie on my back, and different things like that. And so very quickly, I learned I was either going to really grieve too much for too long, or I would just have to accept, you know, why does this happen? I don't know. And just go, well, okay, peace that passeth understanding. I get that now. At the time I thought that. And then, you know, I was, you know, so overjoyed to have two wonderful, healthy sons afterwards. But what had happened was something had pushed me through a veil. And all of a sudden, things were more, I was vibrating on a different level, I think you can say. And I think that when something that catastrophic or traumatic happens, whether it's a car accident or a loss of a child or a severe illness, we open to a different level of spirituality, right? So I think sometimes they can call it a shamanic death, where you are almost down to nothing and then you go forward, you're reborn in a way. So I feel like I've been talking for a long time.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay.
You packed a lot in that increment. And the shamanic death I will circle back to that. But my main question for this one segment is, do you feel like you were a highly intuitive child? Because I'm finding a lot of times now, as I'm doing more and more of these interviews, that a lot of these psychic, intuitive people in this business, I'm going with like 50-50. 50, you know, yes, we can look back, those of us who do not consider ourselves highly intuitive children. I don't consider myself I was not a highly intuitive child. Yet I can look back and notice that I was still connected.
Yeah.
I do think that, you know, there's children that are vibrating on a higher, different level, and that poses strengths and difficulties. But do you think that you were a highly intuitive child?
I don't think so. I mean, I was a very imaginative child.
Yeah.
So where does that line
I know.
go, right? And I mean, I think when I look around me, I just turned 60 this year. So when I look at my friends who are like 10 years younger or 20 years younger or 30 years younger, who it's almost like they had more experiences and or more validation when they were kids, right? I also have a friend who grew up in the Greek culture, her Greek family. Of course you're psychic. Of course you are, right? Like, so it was an accepted part of her culture. I don't want to go across the board on everybody from Greece, but from her family, and that it was absolutely, of course. And I think now that more and more children are coming in who vibrate so high, and that's, I think, where some of the problems with kids with, autism umbrella and things like that is they're just having such a hard time. They vibrate so high that to put them into the physical body, it's just such a challenge. So I think that might be part of what is going on there. I don't know. But I think that I was a very creative, imaginative child. And were I a child now with a parent who was open spiritually, possibly I would have been seen as an intuitive child, but it wasn't in our vocabulary really.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's important for people to understand that um, you that we have these qualities and these abilities, and yes, we come in at different levels, but it doesn't cut you off, you know?
No, and I always say to people, it's like intuitive or psychic ability to me is the same as musical ability. So
Yeah,
that everybody is born with some, okay? You can be somebody who likes to listen to music. You can be somebody who can pick up any instrument and play it and compose incredible songs right away. On that spectrum, no matter where you start, if you practice, you get better, right?
yeah,
And then I think intuitive psychic ability is the same. We all have some, whether it's that little weird feeling in our gut when we, or the hairs on the back of our neck, or whether it goes to the person who has always seen spirit, always hears spirit, like, and knows things. And wherever you are, if you practice, you're going to develop your skills more. So, yeah.
and then also to having this baseline, talking to your children about this or being a part of your, so you walk up to this catalytic event
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of not have a formula, but you have a base. So you have something to look at perspective a little bit differently. And how I want to walk into this is when you were pregnant with Jenny, we kind of talked about this a little bit. Could you talk to me a little bit about that? Like coming into that pregnancy, did you know you were pregnant? Um, what did you know? Or you look back now and you feel like you could have felt it, or
I mean, I wanted to be pregnant. We got pregnant. It wasn't an unplanned pregnancy, and was just thrilled. I did have some spotting early on, which can happen, and then she got quieter inside, and when um, when I knew. And you have the perfect pregnancy where you only eat what you're supposed to eat and you do exactly the exercises. I was really focused on being perfect. And then she hadn't grown in a month. And so they took me to the hospital to try and figure out what was going on. And you could feel all the hospital juggernaut kicking into gear. Okay, what can we do? We can do intrauterine surgeries. We can do all this stuff. And you're sort of like, ay, ay, ay. And so they let me go home for 2 nights. It was the weekend or something. And so the way it worked. And I had this conversation with her and my husband at the time, and just this, talked to her and said, listen, if you're not going to be able to have a full life and to dance, and have a happy full life, you're allowed to let go. And so she did. And so that was a fortunate thing. So she let go and passed by the time I got back to the hospital. And then they did, because of the stage of pregnancy where she passed, it was at a stage where quite often pregnancy would be viable. But they did an autopsy, and they determined that the situation was, I think they call it triploidy, where there's 3 sets of chromosomes instead of 2, which is just incompatible with life. And they actually told me at the time that they think probably 80% of all spontaneous miscarriages that happen in the first trimester are because of this condition. So I don't know if that has medically been proven or not since then. This was a while ago. This was the 80s, late 80s. And so they were just amazed she had lived as long as she had, but she had such a spirit to be with me, and I had such a spirit to have her. So, and right away, almost, hummingbirds started to show up, and I would think of her. And so for me, a hummingbird is always, hey there, Mom, from her. So, and I think that, and in trying to heal from that level of grief too, you look for, when you look for meaning, and when you don't find meaning, then you just go forward. And but things started to happen from there. Things started to happen. I would see more things. I would hear more things. And to make that's when you go, oh, am I losing my mind? Or is this something that is documented in all cultures all around the world for as long as there have been records kept? So I chose to believe I wasn't losing my mind, and I started to learn how to deal with it better. So I would see things and I would go, cool. So because it was new for me, I hadn't grown up consciously seeing things or being aware of stuff like that. I was very big into only good spirits and spirits with good intentions are welcome around me. And I would say that in my head 200 times a day, just sort of to make sure that my home and was a safe space for me and my kids and my family, my husband, and just to, because I didn't want to cut it all off. Although I kind of freaked out at one point, didn't want to see things anymore. So then by the time I was ready to see things with my real eyes, it took a long time of me saying, okay, I'm ready to see things with my real eyes, before it actually happened again. And when it did happen the first time, I was so startled. And then I went, no, it's okay. I'm happy to keep seeing things. So, but I tend to be somebody who sees with my inner eye and hear with my inner ear, as opposed to seeing with my real eyes and hearing with my real ears. So I think that's not uncommon, but.
No, I've talked about that with a last few guests. It's kind of a question that I started to touch on, because I think people get confused about that. They think psychics all see with like their actual eyes, and that was confusing for me when things started to happen for me.
Were you seeing inside your eye?
Inside, like, yeah, like where I would think my imagination is. I was like or a memory, like where you see a memory.
Yeah.
A memory that there's no reason for me to have, because didn't happen. So yeah, I keep finding that is a misconception, and
Yep.
It frees people up a lot when they know.
Yeah, well, that's why I always try and say that, because I realized that people thought when I said I was listening, because in my readings I always say, oh, I'm listening to my guides, your guides, angels, spirits who crossed over, who dropped by to chat, things like that. But they thought I was hearing with my real ears. And almost never, I mean, every now and then I'll hear someone call out with my real ears. Every now and then I will see something with my real eyes, but not generally, not usually.
Yeah. This is interesting to me, because you've had, you have two boys and you had Jenny. I would like to touch on the idea of when you believe the soul actually enters the body.
Oh, that's cool, because and especially in the climate, right? So I think it actually is different from pregnancy to pregnancy. I really do. With Jenny, I'm not really sure I know, but I know that she was there when I felt movement, okay, which would be about, I don't know, 12 weeks or something, 14 weeks. And that's in the olden days, that's when you were pregnant, was when you felt something moving. Okay, oh, you're pregnant, right? Otherwise it was just a late period. With my first son, I knew the instant that it was, I mean, it had to even be before conception, right? It was like, I knew that the moment it was like, boom, I knew he was there. I knew he was there. And that was, and I was right. He was. And I would dream about him, and I kind of just had the sense. And with my younger son, it was almost like I watched his spirit with my real eyes one night, looking at me above my bed, and then sort of making its way down. And I just sort of, welcome little one. And so I probably would have been about, it was before it was testing positive. So it would have been about 6 weeks, probably. The olden days of, you don't know when you're 2 days pregnant or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then I think there are cases where spirit doesn't come in till, oh, I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, and she thought that it wasn't till the baby was coming out that the spirit came in. That had been her experience. And then that I also have an understanding that we have deals with, so if you can accept or be open to the possibility that we come back and live many lives. The way I see it and understand it is we have souls, and if you think of the soul as just light, and then the soul keeps coming back into human form to learn lessons, and we set those lessons for ourselves. And my midwife had explained this to me when I lost my daughter, and she said, you know, in Tibetan thought, in the Tibetan belief, that you can sometimes need just a little bit more time in physical form to move to the next level of progression. And so sometimes between lives, two souls will make an agreement. Okay, I will give you the gift of that perfect time inside the womb, and you know, not for very long, knowing I don't get to keep you. And that's the gift that I give you. And the other soul says, okay, and the gift I give you is all the lessons from that level of pain and sadness that you'll have from losing me. And it's an agreement. And so my understanding about that is, so there was the physical explanation for why miscarriages happen, but then there's this whole spiritual explanation, which is if it's a miscarriage or a termination, that's already been determined, that between lives, it's already forecast. And so that is kind of playing out an agreement. It's how I understand it. Obviously, I don't know if I'm right or not. And I always say I can be wrong, but that is my understanding.
Well, I'd like also to pull that apart a little bit more. Then how has that played now, having your midwife explain that to you after losing Jenny? How has that played out for you in your life? You know, even if that wasn't your belief, like, you know, now these things are playing out in your life, and how has that worked out, suffering that pain?
Well, it did give me a lot of comfort at the time. It gave me a lot of comfort at the time. And I have shared that with other women who have experienced pregnancy loss for whatever reason. And it or even the loss of a young child, or any child. It's like, oh, why? It's out because it's out of order, right? And I wanted to loop to something, and I've forgotten where I was going. But the other thing is, I remember, is at a point I recognized with the work that I do that I am so much more useful because I have a shared experience. I have a taste of what it feels like to lose, you know, a 2-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 40-year-old. I have the sense of what it's, because I lost a child, right? And I remember saying to somebody around that time, it's that you can't say, oh, your loss is greater than mine, or my loss is greater than yours. Loss is loss. And I think the longer you know someone, the harder it is to lose them, because you're also losing all those memories. But when you lose someone earlier, you're losing all the hopes and dreams, right? So they're very different, but they're both very, very valid losses. And you know, I used to say, and I still say, you join a club you never wanted to belong to when you lose a child. And I think that it really has enabled me to be a much more empathetic person, and people who have lost children, when they come to me, they know. I never say I know what you're feeling, but I will say I have a taste of what you feel. I have a taste of your loss.
Yeah.
And they recognize that in me, right?
Yeah. And there's a trust there. There's, you know, they're not coming to you for that specific reason, but you understand, even in the smallest increment. I mean, in anything, I'd rather go to um, a doctor that's done, if I had a child with cancer, like I would like to go to a doctor. I almost would prefer to have a doctor that maybe had a child that went through cancer. So
Mm.
all those emotions and everything, they have empathy towards that, compassion, and they might be able to give me some kind of roadmap about what emotionally I might be experiencing, so I can check the flags, like, oh, they said this might happen.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
that you're giving them the answers, but they might have a roadmap.
Well,
and
yeah,
and
exactly.
community. I mean, how many of us here want to connect in that community because those people know what you're going through? You don't want to belong to that club, but I'm sure the gratitude of finding the people within that, the club that nobody wants to belong to, um, the gratitude and having them help heal you by them being is immense.
It is. It really is. And people come out of the woodwork. Thank goodness pregnancy loss and child loss is being more openly spoken about now than it was even 35 years ago, and then certainly more than 70 years ago or 100 years ago. It wasn't the same sort of conversation. People wouldn't tell anybody they were pregnant until they were out of their first trimester in case they lost the baby. Well, that's when you need that support. So that's changed. But I think and I think sometimes people are really surprised too when they come for a reading, and I've got a little spirit popping around, and little spirit wants to say hi, and little spirit, especially if it's like an early pregnancy loss, it's before little spirit might have been around, but we don't know. Was it a boy or a girl? We don't know, but it's little spirit, right? And
Yeah.
then, and that's different from when a child comes through or an adult child comes through, but still it is there. It's a whole different thing when a kid is coming through to talk to their parent. And it really is. And the roadmap that you're talking about, I mean, I think grief counseling and going to peer support groups it's really helpful for people. And also, people all expect, one thing I'm always telling people who are in grief is, people tell you the first year is going to be the hardest. It's going to be so hard. First birthday, anniversary, Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever. And first year is really hard, but the second year is really hard too. And people aren't expecting that. And so I always sort of say, well, the second year you may find just as difficult, especially when people are going, well, you've already been through it once without them. So by the third year, it seems to relax quite a bit. But yeah, in terms of a roadmap.
Yeah. I have a question now. We're talking about the spirit entering the body, and we're talking about making an agreement or a karmic contract. I can relate with all of this because
Mm-hmm.
I felt like Dominic, before I even got pregnant, was banging on the door to get in. And I
Yep.
still had to go through fertility treatments. But I mean, that that boy was banging, like.
Yep.
And then I had Eve, who, I don't know if she didn't come in until like the second trimester, and she never moved. I never felt her once, but I do remember being in the second trimester and all of a sudden just knowing, like, I am a girl. And it wasn't just about being a girl. It was like this huge sense of um, calm that I'd not even experienced in my own life. Just a knowing. And probably that's, one of major memory of sparking my intuition. Like, looking at it and going, oh, that was a piece.
Yep.
Because we didn't find out with her what she was. But now that you've also gone through this, do you think that Jenny's working with you from the other side? Because other side, quote unquote, because I notice it lately. I've had people lose a lot of children or spouses as of late, and it's heartbreaking, but I also feel like I'm learning a lesson, because these children seem to be coming through in different ways, whether it be through dreams and dreams through children, animals. Like we said, I have a friend whose husband passed away, and her twins were like, well, daddy's here again today. And, it's daddy's a hawk, daddy's here again today. Daddy's here. Don't you know, daddy's a hawk. So many different ways, I think, to like spur the parent to wake up, like that catalytic event. And I was wondering if you felt that Jenny was on the other side, working or helping you even now.
Well, certainly that when I do my prep to work every day, calling on my guides and my angels, and the three on the other side, my grandmother, my sister, my daughter, and my dad, and all my ancestors. But so I always feel them around. I always know they're helping. I feel like Jenny, especially when she was younger, used to help bring through other little ones. She has given me beautiful stories and examples through the year that I can use to share with other people. Yes, here's an example that with my daughter visiting, or of knowing that this was the case, right? And so an example would be when my boys were little, about 3 and 5, they were in a wedding, so I had to buy them dress shoes. And as I was in the dress store, I got, taken over, I've drawn over to the display of the little girl's black patent leather shoes. And I was looking at them and thinking, oh, I'd be getting some for her, And about 2 weeks later, I ended up going to a psychic, which I didn't go to psychics very much then, right? It was a big deal. And he said, oh, I feel like there's a little girl here about, 5 or 6 years old. And I went, yeah, that makes sense. And he said, it's really odd. He said, usually when children come to me, they're barefoot, but she is really proud of and showing me she has these beautiful, shiny, black patent leather shoes on. And it was so cool, right? Like, okay, so she got them, right? So there's been examples like that. And I think when people wonder what's going on with kids, and there's so many kids coming in right now, so connected, that I have, parents and grandparents coming to me and going, is my kid nuts? Or is my, how can this really be happening? I don't think it's like that in my family. But then they start to relax and go, oh, okay, maybe that is. And it's almost seeing with their own eyes. We all don't, a lot of us don't believe until we see it with our own eyes or we experience it, right? Which makes sense. So I had one client, and she had her granddaughter was about 2.5, 3, and and she was one of those little kids who'd talk to the people in her bedroom, and but not much thought about it, vivid imagination, until one day my client opened her laptop, and there was a picture of her husband who'd passed years before as her screensaver, and the little one went, oh, my friend. And she sang this little French Canadian song that had never been sung to her by the family, but that grandfather used to sing. And so it was, they were just sort of like, ah. And it's like, yep, he visits, he's taking care of her, he's keeping an eye on her, and
Yeah.
he's always been singing to her. So it's allowing people, it's validating for people that that children have this ability. And I think, it's one of those things that when we're little, we've got these, we're much more open because we haven't been taught it's weird or it's not normal or whatever. And so we haven't squelched it or made it go sideways yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think also too, I kind of like hash out. This isn't a child, but I remember one time my grandfather, I haven't really lost that many people in my life, to be honest, but my grandfather, he passed away when he was 69, and I was a sophomore in college, and he was like Buddha. I mean, really, the kids could have lit the house on fire and he would have just watched and lit marshmallow, he would have roasted marshmallows. Really couldn't. He was so accepting. He was a wonderful man. And I remember having this one thought, and I was saying it to an intuitive friend of mine, and I said, I always wonder if he left because we needed somebody to work from the other side to wake us all up, because all of a sudden, like, everybody started to lock in, like things started to happen to us, catalytic events, going to war, me with my children, and I needed guide, not that I didn't have spirit guides and stuff, but that was something that I could relate to, somebody that when I went to a psychic, they would say to me, explain this man to me.
Mm-hmm.
That helped with the belief, but now I know how much he works with me from the other side.
Yeah.
And I always with these children too, I'm not saying that it's because of that's why they left, but what I'm saying is that they are there trying to help you,
Mm-hmm.
and like to not lose that, to not waste it, but
I think wake up is a really good way of putting it, like to help us wake up, to
yeah,
help us pay attention. And because we do search when we are in grief, right? We search for
yeah,
ways to feel better. We search, and so you don't want it to become like a bandage that covers a wound that needs to be cleansed and healed. But you do. I think that sometimes you look for meaning, and so that and sometimes it's just someone's time. We have well, whether you believe we have one exit point predetermined or whether you believe that we've got a few different exit points that we can choose, not necessarily consciously at all, but
yeah,
our soul is deciding, have I stayed long enough, have I stayed long enough, and you get to the end and it's like, oh, there's no more choice here, you're out of time.
yeah,
So um, I think because sometimes it's just so odd what happens, but so I think that and it's funny when you're talking about your grandfather. I mean, my dad is very active in helping me with my work. Um, and I didn't really feel that connected with him after he passed for a while. And I was traveling and he came through so clearly there. Um, and ever since then, uh, he helps shy fathers come through. So um, I'll hear a song that I know, oh, it's my dad singing the father song. So there's a father who wants to come through, but he's not really comfortable, or he's not sure how to do it. And so I know my dad helps in that situation too. So, different generations, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So if we had to do terms of strength of ability, I would say mediumship is a big one for you, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'd love to know now, having this, when a parent who has lost a child comes to you, like, what does that feel like? I mean, you can give example story. Um, I know it evolves over time. I know in the beginning, when certain things come to you, they're more extreme. And then as time goes on, things evolve and change. But I was just wondering.
So normally when someone comes for a reading, I won't usually know what their situation is because, you know, I just don't usually know. They just show up. And when I tune in, then I'm always making space first if there are loved ones who want to come through. And loved ones who want to come through are usually pretty right there. Like they've usually been waiting. Okay, it's my chance. Here we go. And so how they will often present is they'll give me this physical symptoms of how they pass. So I'll feel the heart attack or the impact, or I'll feel, you know, I won't be able to breathe or won't be able to swallow, whatever it is, right? And does that make sense? Sometimes I'll get the sense right away, is it an older person, a younger person? And then and if there's a number of people coming through together, it's like, you know, when you drop a bunch of yarn and you have to kind of pull the strands apart. Okay.
Yeah.
Often if it's like one person has recently passed or it's a very important person, they are kind of given center stage. And so then I like to get, you know, who jumps to your mind when I give you this information. And because whoever they think it is generally correct. But then I like to have little weird validations, you know, so whether it's that they let me know they had no teeth, or they'll give me, what was one yesterday? I'm just trying to think. I had a really interesting one. Oh, somebody's grandmother who had passed before she got, or her mother had passed before she got married. That was it. And the mother was showing me the wedding, and then she was showing me the bouquet. I'm like, okay, she keeps showing me the bouquet. She's showing me the bouquet. Well, in the bouquet, the woman had a photograph of her mom attached to the bouquet. So it's like her mom validating, like, I like specific weird things, right?
Yeah.
And kids, I was doing a platform or a stage mediumship not too long ago, and this little boy came through, and he was so insistent, and we figured he passed actually a while ago and belonged to the place and not to somebody there, but somebody there knew the family. So, but he was so insistent, you know, he was okay, and the people, it was like, so what's your big message then, honey? And he's like, you've got to take care of the frogs and the turtles. He was so emphatic. And the group just went, oh, because apparently there was like, they're going to be redoing the bridge, and the turtles and the frogs are in real trouble. So this little boy was very vehement about it. So it was really neat. So yeah, just different things. And then when they come through, I try to let them talk, and I try and give what I'm getting, and hope that it will make sense. I do ask people to let me know if it's making sense or not, because what I'm getting, you know, can be, sometimes we have to figure out what it is exactly. So one time I was seeing spoons, like silver spoons. And I'm like, okay, so they're showing me silver spoons. Well, how do you interpret silver spoons, right? Were you born with a silver spoon in your mouth, or do you have their silverware? Or nope, doesn't make any sense. I'm like, okay, I'm asking in my head, okay, show me something more, show me something. And then they show me all this silverware. I'm like, so now I'm seeing all this silverware. Nope, doesn't make any sense. I'm like not necessarily sterling silver, but like silverware, forks, spoons, knives. Nope, doesn't make any sense. Like, okay. And I'm like, okay, they're showing me, this sounds crazy, they're showing me the silverware in the mud. And the person went, oh, that makes perfect sense. I was like, what?
Right.
Right? How did that make perfect sense? Whoops. And that was because they'd had a pig farm, and they got scraps from one of the institutions nearby. And often there would be cutlery in with the food scraps. And in the spring, it would all come up through the earth, and they'd go and pick them out.
Oh my gosh. That's random.
It's like, the better, the more random the validations are, the more I like them, because, you
Yeah.
know, and that's how, when the mediumship started happening for me, and at first, of course, I was going, oh, well, am I making this up? Am I making this up? I have a good imagination. Am I making this up? And then I was like, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. It's like, you just can't. And if you could make it up, how could you make up something weird for this specific person that makes sense?
Yeah.
Like, so that's, I think, how you start to develop trust in what you're doing. And, kids come through, and there's always so much love. There's so much love. I mean, that's the thing about the work I do, is there's so much love. So even when it's, hard days are when it's, people who passed from suicide or who have been murdered. Those are hard days for me, because the level um, of sadness and sorrow is so great on those, as opposed to, a child passing is always sad, but it's a whole different thing if it's a child who was murdered, or or a
Yeah.
person. So, that's the kind of thing. And the beautiful thing too is, for example, teenagers, if they were funny and, poop disturbers, they'll come through that way, and they'll be teasing their parents, and so I have people laughing and crying at the same time, and me too sometimes, because they're just, they're so irreverent, they're so funny.
Yeah.
So it's how people. Oh, and one thing I always like to tell people is, people who have Alzheimer's or dementia often will come through to me in a reading as though they've already passed. And then after they've passed, they are themselves again. So because it's a physical ailment, your mental acuity is part of your physical, this person body, not your soul.
Yeah.
So you're yourself again. So people come through clear. They're not, you don't carry the dementia into another life.
Yeah.
You heal the same way as if you have a physical ailment. It's done.
Um, I have a question that I when this happened with you with Jenny, how was that to like come when this catalytic event was happening for you? How was that like to talk to your spouse about that, your husband, about what was going on with you and what you were receiving and what you were feeling? Did it take a while? Did you know?
No, the loss of a child tends to either tear people apart, or pull them closer together. And we were very fortunate in that we were able to talk about things, and share what we were going through. And so it was really good that way. Yeah. He was always very open, um, and himself, not, it's not something that he would ever pursue or work with, but it was absolute, like, he never thought that I was crazy or making things up or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So, and I think people really need to, I mean, I know that becomes an issue for some people, especially when there's a very gifted child, because some of the kids these days, they're so gifted. They're
Yeah.
so gifted. So, you have a gifted child and one parent who is gifted and or open to that possibility. And then the other parent who, no, shuts it down. No, 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 that's impossible. That's crazy talk. That's not going on in my house. That's really difficult. That's really difficult, because the parent who sees what's happening and recognizes that to help this kid survive in the world, the child needs to be taught how to protect themselves, how to ground themselves, how to, cut ties with people energetically, so that they're not, smashed bubblegum on the sidewalk, so to speak.
Yeah.
Really, it's a challenging thing if one parent is saying that that's crazy talk. So no, we were both on the same page. So um, that was really good.
Yeah, I was lucky also too when going through this awakening is that same thing. My husband would in no way pursue this or practice or anything like that. But things started to happen to him too. You know, my son was telepathically pulling stuff from my brain, but he was also pulling it from his. And because I was talking about it, my husband became more open, and he never ever shut me down, but it was able for him to start noticing those things in his own life. Like, Tara, how come you call every time I pull up to the mailbox, even though like you can't, from our house, you can't see the mailbox? Or just random things. Like he had a dream about losing his teeth. And then, like a week later, somebody in his family started losing their teeth. And it was, thank God that it was simultaneously happening to him also, but I could not imagine how difficult it is to not have a spouse or have a spouse that shuts it down or makes fun or those things. Because I don't know, when I went to, the marriage counseling right before you get married, and I remember being told that above all else, you and your spouse need to be connected. You must love them over your children. And I remember in my head hearing, that's not how it works. Like, I remember that. That's not how it works. In no way is that how that works. And maybe you should disregard that information, because it doesn't work that way. People come in and out, and different relationships are for different reasons, to teach you different things. But I never in my whole life in this specific situation felt like I had to bring him along unless he wanted to, unless he wanted to be a part.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, same thing goes for our children. We don't need to,
yeah, that's a good point.
Right? Like we instill in our kids that you live with integrity, whatever your belief system is, but that doesn't mean they need to accept it. And I don't believe in indoctrinating kids in whatever thing it is. So you give them information, you show them what you believe. I have one person I'm very close to in my life who really doesn't think what I do is real. And they think I have good intentions, but I'm delusional. and that's okay. Yeah. I don't need to try to change their mind. But this is a really, really good friend of mine, and we treat each other with respect. And even though she really thinks I am delusional, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And she even, has told me experiences she's had, and she goes, well, you would probably think it's something else, but I know it's just coincidence. And I'm like, bum, bum, bum. Yeah. but I just go, yeah, I would probably tell you it was something else, but I don't think you're asking me, are you? No, because I know it's just coincidence. It's like, okay then, but she still tells me, because there's a part of her that possibly wonders, I think. Yeah. But so, but I don't think we can, I don't think we need to talk anybody into anything. I really don't believe in proselytizing, whether it's your religion or your spiritual beliefs, or, that you need to eat, an apple every day, whatever it is.
Yeah. What did you say to me? I think we were on the phone, and you said also, we're talking about coincidences, but, issues or things coming up is that when, the universe, throws a pebble at you, and then it throws a rock, and then it drops a boulder.
Yep.
So I think that was the saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They're going to get your attention.
yeah, there's if it is absolutely imperative, like the boulder's coming, no matter
Yeah.
how much you want to call it a coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're here to learn lessons. I believe that we're here to learn things. And so if we're not learning something, it just keeps getting bigger
Yeah.
until you really can't ignore it.
No, not in the least. So now I want to talk a little bit. I talked to Liz a little bit about Psychic Kids United, but would you give me how you kind of came to that also too? Because she told me how she came to the development of Psychic Kids United. Now, how did you come to that
Yeah.
space?
So it's really cool because we always say Liz is the mom and I'm the aunt. I'm the auntie. You know, it was Liz had this idea. She had all these people coming to her. She has a very gifted little granddaughter, and you know, and she was talking to me, and she said, you know, all this is going on. And I was like, yeah, I'm having a lot of people, and at that time, especially like just parent after grandparent after grandparent after parent. What do I do with my kid? How do I help my child? Da da da. And so we realized there are no resources. There just aren't. And because we have between us over 100 years of experience, right? Um, we thought, well, what would we like to have known when we were starting out, and how can we help people make sense of this? So, you know, the website has taken us much longer than we anticipated, just because we're not technologically as adept as we wish we were, but we're getting there. We do have a test up that will help people to identify where their gifts lie. So whether they're psychic, medium, healer, empath, or just interested in the world of spirit. And it's interesting, especially when people who are having, you know, certain problems just getting along in the world, and suggest to them, well, take this test and see. And suddenly they realize, oh my goodness, I'm an empath, score so high on empath. You go, well, no wonder you are drained all the time when you work around all these people and you don't know that they're sucking your energy. So we have the first two courses are pretty much ready to go, which are the free ones about self-care and protection grounding. And then we have this whole list. We've got about 100 topics that we are developing courses. Most of them are written, just not put up as recorded lessons yet. But that's the impetus was to have this library available to people anywhere, so that you could just, you know, go online, buy a course, and learn and develop, be and know that you're not alone. That's the other huge part of it. Everybody thinks they're the only ones. Now I think this might be getting a little bit less, but everybody thinks, oh, nobody else sees colors around people's heads, or nobody else hears things in the night, or nobody else, whatever. I'm the only one. And, you know, if you learn that young, you tend to be very closed. I once did a party just a couple of years ago for family members, and I think I read 8 different people that day, all family. All of them were having these incredible psychic, medium, intuitive experiences, and they all thought they were the only one. They all thought nobody in their family would understand. And I don't talk about what happens in one reading to other people, but at the end of those readings, the whole room was there, and I said, okay, guys, I have to tell you one thing. Every single one of you is having experiences that you think nobody else is having. So please talk to each other. You're not crazy. You know?
Yeah.
So kind of got off track from where Psychic Kids United, but that is, we want people to know they're not alone. We want them to help them to feel safe, to know that it's a normal thing. It's part of who we are and what we are. It's a sense that, you know, the sixth sense we have, everyone has it. You know, there's all sorts of other senses we have too, like balance and other things, but more than 5. But that sixth sense is so important. And it's it's the one that keeps you from, it's the one where you know whether it's safe to walk home the 2 blocks from the subway or whether you need to take a cab.
Yeah.
It's that knowing, it's that feeling. Yeah.
I was trying to explain it to somebody the other day. I said, you know, how much easier life would be also too if you were shooting an arrow, like you were taking the time to shoot directly to hit the target, any target, let's say job or whatever, versus just running around willy-nilly shooting the arrow like a chicken with your head cut off and hoping that you don't, and living in fear that you're going to get hurt or hit or anything like that. Yeah, it's a part of us now. Now there's so much I realize how many targets and everything that I'm hitting, or I'm not living in fear anymore because I have this sense.
Yeah.
Because I'm paying attention and because I'm slowing down. You know, I'm not wasting all this energy and all this extra in living in fear and anxiety and all, because I can feel like, okay, it's time to leave this party. We're officially maxing out. I can feel here. Or I know I really want to go to that seminar, but I get, you know, the feeling that I shouldn't. And then the seminar gets, I don't know, rained out. Or there's just so much more energy is saved.
Yep.
And it's there to protect you, like you said, walking home from the subway.
Yeah. And if we just listen to our to that intuition, we have, and whether you call it your, you know, your inner voice, your higher soul, your knowing, it's all of those things sort of at the same time. Trust that voice. I mean, my favorite story, I'll tell you another story. My favorite story about listening to that little voice was, my husband and I were getting ready to go on a trip for a wedding in Winnipeg. So I'm in Ontario in Canada. So Winnipeg is a city in another province in Canada, for anybody who doesn't know that. And we don't need a passport to fly within our country. So we were taking our driver's licenses, obviously we were going to rent a car, blah, blah, blah. As I'm packing, I hear, take the passports. And I'm like, I don't need to take the passports. We're flying in the country. And I hear, take the passports. I'm like, okay, I've heard it twice. I'm paying attention. I'll take the passports. Get to the airport. We had middle of the night, kind of picked my husband up from, he had a night shift. So we were driving to the airport, got to the airport at like 3 a.m, get out of the car, take the shuttle to the airport. He like falls asleep on the airport bench once we've gone through security. They're calling the plane and I wake him up and I say, okay, hon, you know, wake up. We've got to go through security. Get your wallet out so you can show them your license. And he went, oh, I left it in the car. And I went, oh, that's okay. I've got our passports.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Right? Listen to your voice. Right? What a horror show it would have been if I'd gone, oh, I'm just imagining stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My son went through this thing where he was really into the Titanic.
Yes.
I didn't know everything about the Titanic, which, for the record, if you want to research something in depth, it is so interesting. But I didn't realize after watching documentary and all this stuff, how many people knew it was going to sink before they got on. How many people had these hits, and it was story after story after story. And not only that 14 years before the Titanic had sunk, there was a book actually written called The Titan about the exact scenario. I mean, why it sank, how it sank. That blew I'm getting goosebumps right now just even thinking about it. Like, all, you know, we have it. It's there. You know, the alarm bell will ring it's
Yep.
all there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, even much more recently, when 9/11 happened, the number of people who just didn't go in that day, or something happened and they just changed their mind, or they just were like, you know, they tried to get, but they were delayed, and weird things. And those stores are like, yeah, their angels were looking out for them, or they were looking out for themselves. But it's that the things that make no sense
Yeah.
are beyond sense.
Yeah.
So, we have to, I think it's wonderful when we can credit that and see it as something real, even
Yeah.
if we can't measure it. And, that's the thing. I had a friend one time who was saying, Peg, you, what you're talking about, you can't weigh it, you can't measure it, so it can't be real. And I said, have you ever been in love? Of course I've been in love. Can you weigh it? Can you measure it? Is it
Feel
real?
it. You can feel it because it hits
Right?
you like a Mack truck.
Right. And that's, so in my mind, a lot of the stuff that we do in terms of, intuitive ability, psychic knowledge, mediumship, I do energy healing as well, right? That's a big part of my work. And energy healing, you can't measure it yet, but I think that the yet is what's important, because 200 years ago, internet would have been devil stuff and
Yeah.
totally impossible and could never happen, right? Except maybe in Jules Verne fantasy novel or something. But so I think that we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. It's coming. It totally is
Yes,
coming. I mean, they're already, yeah.
because it changes all the time, right?
Yeah, they're already
Changes
doing
all
those
the time.
body scans where they can sense the energy, like what love looks like and where your body lights up, or hatred, resentment, like it all goes in different parts of your body. And then they've been doing brain scans of people who do have psychic ability, and they can sense, like they can see where the brain is firing and when it's firing.
Yeah,
So, and so when you do the exercises, you are actually turning on those nerve endings and those parts of your brain. So,
which so that's so cool, because that there's proof then of what I've believed, is that by practicing you get better.
yeah,
This makes sense. You're flexing your psychic muscles.
exactly.
So cool.
So cool. Well, thank you. What was the only thing I wish that I had talked to you about was what it was like if people don't talk about people, like children that had passed. I wish I had talked about that.
Do you want to do a little blip right now and stick it in
Yeah,
somewhere?
yeah, I think I could stick it in somewhere. Um, yeah, okay. So this is an addition because I forgot to ask this question, but I think it's kind of important. Is when, as a person who hasn't lost a child, what we find ourselves doing is not discussing it, or not discussing, or when that child passes away, we do not speak their name to that parent almost ever again. And I would love for you to weigh in on that and how that feels, or how, I don't know if even spirit even cares about that. They might just care about their relationship with their parent one-on-one, even though they've passed, but how the parent feels or how the child feels, it's a dicey area. I think people just don't know what to say, and they're so scared to upset the parent.
So I think that not knowing what to say is kind of how we are about death all across the board, and it's only amplified with children, right? And I think the thing is to ask. I was thinking about you and your daughter the other day, or I was thinking about Rob the other day. I was thinking about, and how would you like, sharing memories, I think, is always great, right? So I was thinking about the time the kids were all over at the pool the other day. Would you, is it okay if we talk about that, or would you rather not? And honestly, or I was thinking about when, when you were pregnant, la la la. Ask people, and they will tell you. I mean, you had asked me, is it okay if I ask you questions about, your daughter? And I'm like, yes, And usually I can talk about it without crying now. Sometimes I still cry, but that's okay. It's still okay to talk and cry.
Yeah.
And but I ask people, because I'm very comfortable talking about death now, because it's part of my everyday life, really, and life after death or going forward. But you know, I recently had somebody who lost an adult son, and I didn't know about it for a long time. And I ran into her and I said, I'm so sorry. I heard just recently, and do you want to talk about it? She's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And I said, okay. She said, he died of a heart attack. And I'm really sorry to hear that. But she did not, but that was all she wanted to say. And so, but I gave her that opening,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I think it changes from day to day. So always, always ask, I think, is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And then if you're having a memory of their, like if you knew somebody's child and the child has passed, or it's Mother's Day and their child has passed, you know, say, I'm thinking about you today, you know. So, you know, he was such a great kid. And I know this must be a really hard day for you. I'm sending you love, you know,
Yeah.
like those are the things. And then the bereaved person, such a weird word, but the person who feels like they've lost their limb, then they can decide whether they want to engage or not. But I think if we ask, that's where I always come down on. Always ask, and always, because sometimes you don't want to talk about it. There's a beautiful piece on grief, and the woman was talking about how she went to a school fair and she kept her eyes closed, her head down, because she didn't want anybody to engage with her, and people didn't, because they could, you know, it was almost like she had a sign. But because we don't know, I think it's just, if somebody's got those obvious physical signs of do not talk to me, don't come near me, I don't want to talk about stuff. But for the most part, I think it's just like, do you know?
Yeah. I'm almost
Ah,
getting a little emotional just thinking about it. I just thinking about, oh God, being a parent and then losing a child and then people pretending that they weren't there.
and I think, you know, as the parent, I guess for me, I always was the one who brought it up. So it was years and years before. And you know, people would say, especially when my kids were younger, you know, and how many kids do you have? And,
Yeah.
I would
Oh my
say,
God, that question.
right?
Oh,
So I would say I have two sons here and a daughter in spirit. And they would either go, oh, or they would go, oh, right? But, and sometimes I just didn't want to get into it, or I was too sad that day or whatever. And I would just say, I have two boys. And in my head I would go, sorry, Jenny, I can't deal with it today.
yeah. Yeah.
So, but because I would always, I'm a believer that what you don't talk about festers and grows and
Yeah.
it grows poisonous. So by talking about it, it would, um, and then other people were then given permission. People who had lost children that I didn't know about. I'd never known they'd lost children, and they would tell me things too.
Yeah.
So you're, you know, but you're just, as a compassionate, empathetic human, just ask the other person,
Yeah.
you know.
You're
And
right about the,
especially if you knew, sorry,
oh,
I'm right
sorry.
about,
It glitched a little. Um, you're right
oh yeah,
about people not um, really delving into how they feel about death, though. I think we, my daughter, since we homeschooled, my daughter wanted to be part of this co-op but she's like a person who joins something for a week and then quits. And so I happen to know the person who ran it and whatnot, and she, of course, the week that we start, she loses a little boy who is 2. And I go to the funeral and everything like that. And there was a woman, they brought in grief counselors and everything like that. And they said, anybody who hasn't spoken to their child about the loss of this child passing away, would you please stand over here? And it was me and another woman. And the grief counselors asked, is there any reason in particular that you didn't say anything? And I said, I simply didn't say anything because my daughter didn't know him. And I didn't really know that we were doing this today. They said, well, have you talking to her about death? And I said, all the time. and in my head, I'm going, because she has medium qualities. So, I didn't say that aloud. But this other woman was overwrought with sorrow. I mean, she was sobbing and hyperventilating. And as this time went on, as the grief counselor started talking to her and I was staying there, is the little girl had been best friends with the little boy. And the little girl had been having dreams about him, of them playing. And the mother didn't want to break her heart, essentially. But also it comes out that the mother doesn't know how she feels about death in general, and doesn't know what to say. And she's scared that she's going to upset this child even more and make this child even more anxious by triggering this conversation of death, and that the child may think of the mother as dying. And all this fear, so this fear of not talking about it.
Wow.
And so I just imagine all that anxiety and fear that this mother is speaking about. And I'm sitting here and we have like conversations about death on daily. And I'm sure it kind of like almost like pertains to sex too, and all those difficult conversations. But you're right. We don't talk about death, and we don't not only talk, we don't contemplate it, and explore it. So we're scared of it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the thing is, everybody's born, everybody dies, right? So, are you going to die, mommy? Yes, but not for a long, long time. Right.
Yeah.
And especially when a child has mediumship abilities. And so she's got, folks who are dead popping in to talk to her. But, I mean, I hear that story of that little girl playing with that little boy in her dreams, and like, okay, so there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
If you accept that the soul lives on, well, you know what? Bobby has died, and that means he's not with us in his body anymore. But obviously, he's still with us because he's playing with you in your dreams, and it's just another way of you connecting. You know that he's there, and he's okay. His spirit's great. Just his body isn't with us anymore.
Yeah.
It gets very complex, right?
It gets so complex.
But
you got to start somewhere.
I think, well, and sex is a great analogy, right? Things people don't want to talk about, death and sex, right? Politics.
Right.
But if it's part, and because death has become so other, people don't die at home the same way. They don't, it used to be that was the family that took care of, the body afterwards and things like that. We have that distance now, and it's been allowed to become unknown and scary, and didn't used to be the same way. So I think, yes, like sex, talk about death, sex from the get-go, and then it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And also too, that is your opportunity for you to explore it. I mean, my son asked me about death, and Eve was asking me, she'd asked me things about people that she had seen or whatnot, but she was still quite little. And I had to really explore it and get a good feeling of what I felt about it. Because was I going to just leave him in the lurch? Mommy, what's going to happen when you die? Oh, I don't know,
Yeah.
Sorry.
And there are many good answers, right?
Yeah.
Whether your answer is you just turn into nothing, which I don't believe, but that's okay. That some people do. It's just it's like you go to sleep and you don't have any dreams and you just never wake up again. That's what some people think. But I wouldn't say that personally, but some people think that. Whether it's you go to heaven and in heaven it's like this, and that's a beautiful way of looking at it too.
Yeah.
Or your spirit stays around as long as there are people that you knew or who remember you or you were interested in their lives.
Yeah.
You can be in heaven or on the other side, but still connected.
Yeah.
It's there's so many layers.
Yeah. If you're stumbling, it's time, like for me, when I was stumbling, I needed to really explore why and how I was connected to my children. That was
Yeah.
a big thing. I
Yeah.
mean, for so many reasons, but that was another thing. Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't wrap my head around that I just birthed children and surprise, like there's no reason, we're just
Yeah.
going through this. But
Well, and I think that's why the whole multiple life for the soul scenario makes sense to me, because otherwise, why?
yeah,
Otherwise, why? Right? But that's just a personal thing, right? I just like to have a bigger why, a bigger because.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean that that's the right way to be, but it's my right way to be.
yeah. And how cool is it too when you start exploring it and you're like, why are we to get together? And you get one answer, say just because you need to help one another, but then it can just grow into other things if you look into like past life regression. And for me, I'm repeating the exact same life I did before because I do not feel like I did a very good job at the last one. So I decided to completely replicate what I'm doing again. And then it's like, well, why are you doing that for, like, these are the questions you ask. Well, there's a contribution to humanity and how you're making the world go around. And why is that contribution to humanity making the world go around? Like, is it to save the earth? And like the question just keeps opening and opening and opening and opening, and it's so infinite. And the answers are addictive, but
And the one thing too is that sometimes you start to feel, but what I do really impact a difference? How can, and I always love the starfish story. I don't know if you know that one. There's
no.
there's a person walking down the beach, and all the starfish have washed up on the beach. And there's this guy walking along, and he just keeps, picking them up one by one and tossing them back into the ocean. And there's thousands of them, and someone comes along and says to him, why are you even doing this? What kind of difference do you think you're actually making? And the guy picks up a starfish and throws it in the water, and he says, I made a difference to that one.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I look at my life, and the work that I do is I try to spread light wherever I go. That's my goal. But I know there are individuals who I have really helped to grow, to heal.
Yeah.
And that's what we can hope for, right?
Yeah. And starting with your kids alone. Like, if there's anybody you need to help, start
Or
with
they need to help
yourself.
you. They need to help you a lot of the time, right?
Start with yourself. If you really want to get singular about it, like that's really where to start. But if you want to, with kids, like that's a good place to start. If you don't feel like, you're right, I'm making a difference to the grander scheme, and the way I feel like I've made a difference started right here.
It's the only place it can start.
Oh, you can't start anywhere else.
No.
Yeah. It's like you can't get a flower without the seed in the ground.
No. I really believe we are responsible for our own healing. We draw our own healing, we do our own healing, right?
Yeah.
And as we heal, then our light shines, we shimmer, and then other people also can take that and heal themselves.
Yeah.
We're only helping other people to do their own work.
Yes.
And we have to do our own work, and then our example and or our teaching experience, whatever, can help other people do their own work.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes, for sure.
Well,
Thank you for my little addition. It was a good addition.
It was a good addition. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Perfect.